Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, November 26th. Tomorrow's Thursday, Thanksgiving here in the U.S., 2025. Colonel Douglas Macgregor will be here with us in just a moment. Will attacking Venezuela cost Donald Trump his presidency? Colonel Macgregor, welcome here, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule today. Before we get to a fascinating piece you have posted at the American Conservative on the consequences of an American attack on or invasion of Venezuela, I have to ask you about the latest involving Ukraine, the 28-point peace proposal reduced to 20, wherever it stands, whatever we know. But big question, and I've asked you this before, as well as just about all of our military experts on the show. Will the war in Ukraine end on the battlefield or in a conference room?
I think primarily on the battlefield. The conference room will follow quickly thereafter. And I think we're approaching that point. You know, I think what's happening now finally is this empire of lies constructed by Washington and its globalist allies in Europe is collapsing. The truth can no longer be concealed, although they continue to try and lie their way out of it. But this empire of lies is falling apart. The lie that Russia can't win, Russia's falling apart, Russia's ruled by this evil dictator that the population doesn't support, that somehow or another Zelensky is a patriot, another Washington without the powdered wig, this kind of nonsense. It's all falling apart. So I think the Ukrainian army is surrendering in droves. Many of their senior commanders are walking into some sort of prisoner of war status with the Russians. And I'm hearing from some of my best informers, or informants, if you will, that there is now open talk in Ukrainian ranks about going to Kiev and finishing off this regime, holding Zelensky and his friends accountable, not just for the billions that they've stolen, but the millions of lives they've destroyed.
You mean a military coup turning on the civilian leadership in Kyiv?
Yes.
Wow. You emailed me a piece, and of course, I'm deeply grateful for all the communications we have off air about suggesting a breakdown in the Russian defense industry. I mean, where does this nonsense come from?
Well, I think you've got to go back to the principal spokesman for the imminent failure of the Russians, people like Ben Hodges, Jack Keane, Dave Petraeus, all these military luminaries who've been consistently wrong about everything. The ones that told us, I think, in the fall of 2022, the fall of 2023, the fall of 2024, that the Ukrainians had now mastered the art of combined arms warfare, which is a World War II concept, and were ready to attack and destroy the Russians that had no chance of success. It's part and parcel of the same nonsense. It's astonishing that it continues, but we have to remember that how many people pay that much attention in the United States to what's reported about Ukraine? Not very many. And most people are not studious. They're not going to dig in. They're not going to look for alternative narratives, at least not to the mainstream media. So they get away with it. And of course, they're rewarded financially in a very handsome way for keeping up appearances, even those appearances are all lies.
How bad are the desertions, and does it reach into the officer ranks?
I think it does. And again, now we're getting into trouble because everything that I'm getting on this is anecdotal. In other words, we don't have a center that we can go to and say 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers deserted last week or last month. We don't know. Thousands have done so. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where there are not enough people in the Ukrainian SBU, which is being supported by MI6, CIA, and the Mossad, to keep people in their places, to fill the trenches. And the press gangs are having increasingly more and more difficulty forcibly recruiting people and essentially abducting them. The most recent events were up in Kharkov, and they weren't very successful in terms of picking people up. I mean, the Russians had said before they had completed the operation around Pokrovsk that they were picking up Ukrainian prisoners of war who had been in uniform for less than a week. So all these people can do is continue to die in great numbers, ostensibly for the purpose of keeping the billions of euros and dollars flowing into the hands of people like Zelensky and his supporters. And I think that's finally dawned on people inside Ukraine, and I think they've had it. And I think the parliament in Ukraine is probably ready to desert, and they better, because they're just as likely to be held accountable for the greed and theft and lies as Zelensky and his inner circle.
And do you think that President Trump finally has an accurate handle on this, that he's no longer getting some sort of a false and rosy picture from American intelligence?
I think so. It's possible, because I think he'd like, as a sort of last act of desperation, to get an agreement between himself and Putin on the future of Ukraine, however vague that may be, so that he has something he can point to and say, see, in addition to the last 15 wars I successfully ended, I've now brought this terrible war in Ukraine to an end. I think that's why he's sending Vitkov and Kushner to Moscow to meet with President Putin. The real question is, are the Russians going to take any of this seriously? I mean, at this point, I think they're probably laughing at these attempts, because they understand what's going on. The war is effectively coming to a brutal end, but nevertheless an end. The attacks recently on Kiev just destroyed critical infrastructure, the last sources of power and heating, and they put the government on notice that they're now very much at risk. So I think they're going to go forward and continue to do whatever they do. They'll meet with us, but how seriously will they take us? And even if we start saying, well, we had 28 points, and then we had 22, and then we went to 19, and now we're down to 10, pretty soon it'll be, 3 points, 2 of which have to do with photo ops with Putin somewhere. It's ridiculous. We look ridiculous, and we're going to continue to look ridiculous, because it's not only bordering the absurd in Ukraine, it's bordering the absurd in the Middle East, where this supposed ceasefire is a nasty joke, and Venezuela, which I think has now become a real problem for the president.
Just before we jump over to Venezuela, on which I want to spend some time with you, Colonel, I mean, I would think that President Putin would be very polite to Witkoff and Kushner, and then say, have a safe flight home. But what are these people, these two developers? One's a Manhattan developer, the other a New Jersey developer. One's Trump's former business colleague, the other's his son-in-law. What do they know about the history of the diplomatic relations between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, I think you have to understand that these men are billionaires. And by definition, that means they're the smartest men in the room, wherever they go. No one can possibly know more than them, because they have more money than anybody else. Not because they've done anything, not because they are building a manufacturing base and employing hundreds of thousands of American workers, not because they produced anything, but because of financial transactions. These are the ultimate financial capitalists.
Right.
These people are desperate to keep the dollar as a reserve currency, because the moment they lose it, the opportunity for them to make money goes away. They have profited from this hegemonic financial system that we maintain, that produces nothing of any real value, but basically passes our debt on to the rest of the world and allows us to subvert other people's economies. So what do they know? They don't need to know anything, Judge. They need to be friends of the president.
Do you think that the Kremlin understands that Marco Rubio wants the war to continue, that he represents that Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, John Bolton ideology?
Yes, I think so. I think they also can identify similar people in Starmer's government in London, and similar people in Paris, similar people in Berlin. So I think they do understand. And again, one of the things that you mentioned, I think we should all keep in mind, if nothing else, President Putin, Mr. Lavrov, and others will always be polite.
Yes.
They always have been polite, but nothing is going to come of any of it. And why would it? It's time to end this thing. And things are moving very rapidly in the direction of Moscow.
Do you have enough of a finger on the pulse of the American public, either from your own anecdotal observations and reading or from sources, to opine about whether the American public believes an invasion of Venezuela would be legal, constitutional, and moral?
That's a very excellent question, and I'm not a pollster. I do know that the polling data I've seen suggests that 70% of likely voters that have been polled have said, let's not go into Venezuela. In other words, they don't support the idea. So that tells us something. I think there are still a lot of Americans that were taken in by the argument against drug cartels. I run into people all the time that say, Doug, you've been a real staunch supporter for defending the border. You want to go after these drug criminals here inside the United States. That's great. What's wrong with bombing Mexico? What's wrong with bombing Venezuela? And I keep trying to tell them that you're not going to accomplish much other than kill a lot of people that we'd rather not kill, who are not necessarily our enemies. And then secondly, infuriating much of Latin America that is already not terribly enthusiastic about us at this point. And we really need to solve the problem here at home. This is where the appetite is. This is where the consumption occurs. So let's deal with it here. And, people still think there's something to be gained by attacking any country that is allegedly involved in drug and human trafficking that ends up in the United States. That's about the best that I can do. The people I served with in the military for many years, they're all over the place. They're up in Chicago. They're down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think most of them, would like to get at the drug cartels whenever I talk to them. But I think they also realize that we have to start here at home. And I think that message is being delivered to the White House. There are a lot of people very frustrated with all the promises that the president made regarding our handling of the situation here in the United States, not just regarding the border, but immigration, criminality, and it hasn't really worked out. It hasn't happened.
Well, his tariffs have caused inflation and joblessness. The statistics are right there on the front page of the newspapers. But militarily, how unwise is it? 10,000 troops in Puerto Rico waiting to do what? To storm the beaches of Venezuela as if it were Vietnam?
Well, we haven't seen the plans. All right. So we don't know what the operational plans are, but it looks as though, and it's about 17,000 troops in Puerto Rico, by the way.
Wow.
Lost track of how many thousands of Marines are floating offshore. But it looks as though the idea is that there would be some sort of internal coup. How this is going to be staged and executed is anybody's guess. But the idea is that you get Mrs. Machado installed, and then you seize things along the coast, which can easily be done by the Navy and the Marines. And then you bring in large numbers of Army infantry to operate as a quote unquote stabilization force. Now, we don't know what the underlying assumptions are, and these are very dangerous. Your assumptions drive everything. And there have to be some assumptions that say there are enough people unhappy with Maduro that they will support the armed coup against Maduro. Who knows? I don't know what the numbers are. That's hard to buy into. But I do know something that has happened recently, and that is that the president has just announced that he wants to talk directly to Maduro. And it leads you to ask the question, all right, has somebody finally explained to the president that the border with Colombia is wide open? There are thousands of Colombian paramilitaries willing to come over. And even though they've had their differences with the Venezuelans, they would easily join in and fight with them against us. Is the president aware that the border with Brazil is a triple canopy jungle almost impenetrable. There are only a couple of points where you can cross the border, and those border points are equally open. No one is going to stop anybody from coming in. So you could end up with 50 or 100,000 Brazilian paramilitaries that are willing to come in to make life miserable for us. Maybe some of that has hit home. And perhaps he recognizes this could be very, very costly at a point in time where our, as you've just pointed out, our financial system is fragile, our economy is weak, and maybe this is not a good idea. So what he's trying to do now, I think, is tell Maduro, look, instead of paying somebody $50 million to kill you or remove you, we'll give you $50 million if you will willingly give up your post and allow us to bring in Mrs. Machado and replace you with Machado. And if you do this, we'll grant you immunity. You'll never be tried in any courts of any law that we have influence over. You'll go live on some island somewhere in the Caribbean or the South Pacific or somewhere. You'll have all the money you need and all the women and all the happiness that you could possibly desire. Maybe that's what he's offering him, on the assumption that he's going to sell his country out. Now, people that have spent time in Venezuela, and I know several of them now, have said, and these are some people that have been down there for as long as 9 years, everybody understands the corruption that is a part of life in Latin America. But when it comes to the country, anybody who sells out the country is dead meat as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And I don't think Maduro will accept that kind of deal, because as much as he might like to, he's not prepared to sell out his country and go down in history as the man that sold Venezuela to the United States for $50 million and immunity from prosecution. So I don't think it's going to work. And this is a very terrible position for the president to be in, because he's put the cart way out in front of the horse. He's assembled all this military power. Nobody came in and probably briefed him in detail on the challenge of dealing with Venezuela, which is much larger than Vietnam, with a population of 30 million people. That's very, very difficult to traverse, to negotiate, almost impossible to control if you're a foreign power. And now that's beginning to sink in. And as a way to get out of this, you're offering to buy the man out of his country. And in so doing, he has to sell his country to you. I don't think that will work.
Is there any way to get a handle on the financial cost of 18,000 infantry, the Gerald Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, and all the other ships that accompany it? They've all been down there for a couple of weeks.
Well, operations and sustainment will result in a few $1 million a day. But the problem doesn't start with a few millions of dollars a day. I mean, that may amount to a couple of $1 billion, which, quite frankly, in a war budget, we no longer talk about the Department of Defense. So we'll talk about the War Department's budget of over $1 million. That's a drop in the bucket. The problem commences when you go into the country.
Right.
And you stick your foot into the tar pit, and then you decide you'd really like to get out of the tar pit, and you can't do it.
So you're going to risk American boys, I don't know if there are women involved in infantry, coming home in body bags over a war that Congress didn't debate and didn't declare.
Well, listen, Judge, I am so glad that you brought that up, because I haven't heard anything from Congress that makes any sense. I mean, the Congress wants to attack the president on any number of different issues, whether you bring on Senator Slotkin or Senator Kelly, who want to accuse the president of issuing illegal orders, which he hasn't done, and I don't think he will. I'm not even sure these people could define an illegal order with any great accuracy. And they don't seem to understand, at least while I was on active duty, there were hundreds of thousands of hours spent instructing soldiers in great detail on what an illegal order constituted and their obligation not to obey it. I mean, that was driven home repeatedly. Right. I think this really, really happened on a grand scale as a result of our experience in Vietnam. They don't seem to understand that, but they're attacking the president on this, and yet they are the ones who, under the Constitution, hold the power They can invoke the War Powers Act. You know, you could have started the War Powers Act as soon as he blew up the first so-called drug boats.
There was an effort to do that. The debate was minimal. The outcome was not gratifying under the Constitution because of the because of the presidential stranglehold on the Republicans in the Congress. But what will the American people do? The government cannot identify a single national security threat that Venezuela poses to the United States, and yet we're going to invade it. And if we invade it, boys will die. American boys.
We couldn't identify a threat in Vietnam.
Right.
It didn't make any difference. We fabricated an event, an episode. The Gulf of Tonkin crisis arose. It was a non-crisis. There was a naval officer on the Joint Staff who tried to call to senatorial offices and tell them it was all a lie. There had been no attack. There was no reason for this. Nobody cared. The rest is history. I think most of the people in Washington, frankly, are corrupt. Unless it's going to interfere with their income, unless they think they could lose their office over it, they're happy to sit there and pay no attention until you get to a mass casualty exercise. If the Venezuelans are able to inflict large numbers of losses on us in one day, I recall somebody telling me, well, as long as we don't have more than 100 to 200 casualties on one day, we're probably fine. Nobody will care what we do. I mean, I heard that back in 1991. I heard it again in 2003. People said these things, and that was based on experience in Vietnam. I think the same thing holds true. Now, the one thing that we have going against us at this point that was not true then is the fragility of the economy. You know, the bond market itself could go into a giant tailspin, and then we're in a lot of trouble. We're already having problems because we can't sell our debt to people.
Right.
They don't buy it. But the point is the economic dimension, the financial system and its fragility, the lack of liquidity in the banking system. There are all sorts of emergency meetings happening with the New York Fed and the Dallas Fed and other people where these issues are being discussed. That was not true in 1965. It wasn't true in 90 or 91. It wasn't true in 2003, but it's true now.
Well, Colonel, we are spending $1 trillion a year on debt service, interest payments to the people that bought our bonds. And where do we get that trillion from? We borrow it. Now, how much longer can an entity exist that borrows money in order to pay interest on borrowed money?
Well, Mr. Bessent is also transferring quietly large quantities of cash to the private equity markets because they're very close to collapse. He's been using the proverbial repo window to do that. There's a lot more happening out of sight of the American people right now than the American people realize. That could all suddenly come falling to pieces.
Right.
Over what happens in a place like Venezuela. So right now, I think this is a kind of a Hail Mary pass by President Trump to Maduro. You know, let's talk. Here's the deal. We give you $50 million to go away. You turn over your office to Machado. Nobody gets killed, no harm done, and we'll move on down the road and you'll live out your happy life in the South Pacific or something. I think that's what this is about right now. And at the same time, this is a last-ditch effort to come up with some meaningless piece of paper that we can't enforce, the Europeans can't enforce, but the Russians can, in the hopes that the Russians will grant us an optical illusion. The optical illusion being that President Trump has done something brilliant. In the meantime, what's happening in the Middle East? The people in Gaza continue to die in great numbers. The Israelis are bombing Lebanon with our help and assistance, and Syria is close to exploding. And how many Christians are dying in Syria about whom nobody cares? We could go on and on, Judge. So somehow or another, this can't continue much longer.
Agreed.
I'm surprised it's gone on this long.
But does Donald Trump risk his presidency if Venezuela goes south?
Yes.
If American boys come home in body bags and Congress has not declared the war?
Yes. There's no question about it. he could lose everything. He could be gone in 3 or 4 months. The support for him could evaporate overnight. He needs to understand that. Just because you can successfully bully members of your own party or even members of the other party for short periods of time doesn't mean that you can do it all the time. And if things turn against him, and they could, just think about it. How many aircraft carrying Marines ashore have to be shot down and Marines killed to wake everybody up to the dumb idea of intervention in Venezuela? And you see, there are people in the White House, I'm sure, who are saying, well, if that happens, we always have the rally round the flag effect. People will say, well, those evil Venezuelans, we got to teach them a lesson. I don't see that, Judge. I don't see Americans reacting that way. I see the opposite. I see Americans saying, what? What are you doing? Why? That's a dumb idea. And when those phones ring off the hook and the emails pour in and everybody's saying the same thing, suddenly whatever the president threatens you with doesn't mean a damn thing.
Hi. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, that's an interesting note on which to end this. That's true. I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and I would add, I pray for peace. And
yes.
Kidding.
And as a Thanksgiving treat to your many, many fans on Judging Freedom, we have 8 hours of Colonel Douglas Macgregor being streamed tomorrow. I believe it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern.
Well, I hope this doesn't end up like Clockwork Orange, losing their minds and doing terrible things. I
think a lot of people will be looking at you on Thanksgiving Day, as many, many thousands are watching you now. Thank you, Colonel. Thanks for your insight. Thanks for your personal courage and intellectual acumen. Always a pleasure. Have a great holiday, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Same to you, Judge. Thanks very much.
Thank you.